In the winter of 1888, a prairie storm crossed the northern settlement so fast that people said the air changed its mind in the middle of the day. By noon, children were walking home with their coats open. By dark, the wind was pushing snow sideways hard enough to erase roads, fences, barns, and men. The temperature fell more than 60 degrees before morning. Telegraph lines snapped. Horses froze in harness. Search parties later found bodies within sight of their own doors, close enough to safety to make the distance feel cruel. But on a strip of abandoned rail land west of the Red River, one cabin stayed near 50 degrees through the worst of it. It measured 11 feet by 13. Its walls were 18 inches thick. And every board, every short wood end, every handful of mortar had been put there by a 15-year-old girl who had arrived with $7.40 hidden in her skirt, one hatchet, and nowhere left to be sent. Her name was Elin Rask. 5 months before the storm, she walked into the dead rail camp at North Fork Crossing. The place had been built to feed the railroad with ties, posts, and fuel wood. Then the company moved on. It left behind a scar in the country, stump fields, broken sled runners, piles of cut-off timber too crooked for sale, and a creek bank ripped open where wagons had dragged logs through the mud. No farmer wanted it. No family wanted to spend a winter there. The county called it idle ground because official papers rarely use words like ruined. Elin stood in the middle of it and understood that this was the first place in a year where nobody had assigned her a corner. Her mother had died the previous spring after a fever took her lungs. Her father, a Swedish carpenter and rail cutter named Elin Rask, had been killed months before that on a slope no careful man should have been sent to cut. After the funeral, Elin had been placed with a shopkeeper's cousin in Moorhead. Placement sounded merciful when adults said it. It meant the girl woke first, slept last, ate what remained, and learned how to become invisible in rooms that were not safe enough for sleep. When the cousin remarried, the new wife counted beds, mouths, spoons, and burdens. The orphan girl did not survive the arithmetic. Elin was handed a small purse and instructions to report to the church for another placement. She walked north instead. Her father had once told her about the creek at North Fork. Not as a dreamer talks, but as a builder talks. He had described the clay under the bank, blue-gray and dense, the kind that squeezed between the fingers and held its shape. He had said the old country had villages where people built with wood ends and clay when long timber was scarce. At the time, Elin had thought he was only telling a story. On the first night, she slept beneath a slanted roof of branches and old canvas, listening to coyotes test the distance between their hunger and her fire. In the morning, she began to count. A proper log house required long, straight trees. The railroad had taken them. A safe winter required 6 or 7 cords of fuel. She had a hatchet and arms that already ached from splitting kindling. A roof required boards. The camp had mostly rot. By the 3rd day, the numbers had become a kind of verdict. That was when Jonas Bradall came through the creek grass and found her sharpening the hatchet on a flat stone. He was a widower with a homestead 4 miles east, a man whose beard had gone white before his back bent and whose hands looked permanently shaped around tools. He did not ask what she was doing. He looked at the branch shelter, the cut-off timber, the creek clay, and the girl standing in the middle of all of it. "You are Elin Rask's daughter," he said. Elin said she was. Jonas looked over the ruined camp. Then he told her the truth with the dull kindness of a man who knows the truth will not become softer if he wraps it. "You cannot winter here," she said. "I can build." Not with this. He kicked one of the discarded cutoffs. It was short, split across one end, and curved like a rib. That is stovewood, not house timber. Then I will build with stovewood. For the first time, Jonas looked at her face instead of her shelter. He told her what the cold required. Walls high enough to trap heat, a roof steep enough to shed snow, a chimney that would draw, food enough to keep her hands from failing, firewood enough to outlast February, time enough to do all of it before the ground locked solid. You have none of those things, he said. I have this. She pointed to the piles the railroad had abandoned. Jonas almost answered. Then he saw that she already knew how poor the answer would sound. Before he left, he pointed toward town. The church could place her. A family would take a capable girl. Elin said, I have already been taken. There are sentences that carry more than their words. Jonas heard what was beneath that one. He looked away first. Then I will leave you to your stubbornness, he said. But stubbornness does not burn. After he was gone, Elin walked to the creek and dug her fingers into the clay her father had described. It came away heavy and smooth. On the 8th morning, she discovered the method by accident. She had been cutting short pieces to clear space, stacking them near the fire with the ends facing outward. Because none of the pieces matched, they locked into each other strangely. A bent piece held a split one. A narrow piece wedged beneath a thick one. The ugliness made friction. The waste made grip. She stared at the little stack for a long time. Then she packed clay between the ends. The clay did not run. She added sand from the creek, ash from her fire, and dry grass chopped fine enough to disappear in the mixture. The mortar tightened around the wood and held. By noon, she had a wall section 3 feet long and knee-high. It looked like a pile of firewood that had forgotten to fall over. She shoved it with both hands. Nothing moved. That was not a cabin. It was not even proof. But it was the first answer the land had given her that did not sound like no. She marked an 11 by 13 rectangle near the creek, where the ground rose just enough to stay dry. The wall would be 18 inches thick, the length of each wood end. Too thick by ordinary standards, ridiculous by the standards of men who had never had to turn waste into shelter. But thick walls would slow the wind. Thick mortar would seal the gaps. Thick mass would drink heat all day and give it back when the fire burned low. She did not have the words for thermal mass. She had only her father's old stories, her own hands, and the simple knowledge that cold enters where a builder leaves permission. Hunger nearly ended the work before the walls reached her knee. Elin set snares across the trails she saw in the grass. For 4 mornings, they were empty. On the 5th, she stood too quickly, and the ground folded toward her, gray at the edges. She lay under the canvas and thought about walking to town. A clean stove, bread, a bed in another family's house, rules she did not write, doors she did not own. Then she remembered her father kneeling beside a winter creek, showing her where rabbits drink before dawn. Not across the trail, he had said, beside the water, low, loose, let the animal choose the noose. She had set every snare like a person guessing, not like a person remembering. That evening, she reset them by the creek bank. The next morning, there was a rabbit in the second wire. She cooked it slowly and ate the heart first because her mother had taught her that the body needs iron when the world has taken everything else. By afternoon, her hands no longer shook. She went back to the wall. By mid-September, the cabin had become a rumor. The Swede girl was building a house out of firewood. The orphan had gone feral. The rail camp had a witch wall. People enjoy naming what they do not intend to understand. Marta Soren came to see for herself. She was a widow with 2 sons and a farm on the North Ridge. Her husband had been crushed beneath a wagon load of ties 2 winters earlier, leaving her with debt, bad soil, and a habit of making decisions before anyone around her had finished talking. Marta walked around the foundation without greeting Elin. She pressed her thumb into the mortar. She tapped the wood ends with her knuckles. She studied the depth of the wall from the open corner. "This will crack when the hard freeze comes," she said. "Maybe. The wind will find every seam. The seams do not go through. It is still a wood pile. Then it is a warm wood pile." Marta looked at Elin for a long moment, not kindly. Kindness would have been easier to reject. She looked at her the way one worker looks at another worker doing something dangerous with insufficient tools. Then she took dried beans and a twist of salt pork from her saddlebag and set them on a stump. "I brought too much," she said, which was not true. "My younger boy needs reading. If you are alive by October, you will teach him." The boy's name was Niels. He arrived the next week with a slate under his arm and skepticism written plainly across his face. He was 9 years old, thin as a fence rail, and already too used to watching adults fail each other. He circled the half-built wall and touched the mortar. "Is this your house?" "It will be." "It looks like stacked firewood." "It is stacked firewood." That made him grin despite himself. Nils learned letters quickly because hunger had taught him concentration long before schooling arrived. By the 4th lesson, he could sound out short sentences. By the 5th, he brought nails from his mother's shed and a tin cup with no handle. "For the stovewood house," he said. The name stayed. In late September, Nils found a dog under a collapsed tool shed. It was a narrow brown animal with burrs in its coat and the still eyes of something that has learned not to beg. Elin did not have food for a dog. She said so twice. Nils said nothing. He only kept looking at the animal and then at her. The dog followed her back to the cabin site without being called. She named him Flint because he sparked a warning growl before she ever heard trouble coming. At night, he slept against her back under the canvas. Until he arrived, Elin had not realized the silence had weight. The walls rose slowly. 2 feet. 3. 4. She learned to sort the wood by diameter so the courses would not drift. She learned that too much clay made the joints shrink. Too much sand made them crumble. Straw helped. Ash helped. Lime would help more if she could afford it. In October, Jonas Bredal returned. He stood at the edge of the clearing and stared at the 4-foot wall he had said could not exist. He did not apologize. Instead, he set a full-sized axe on the stump beside Elin's mortar trough. "Your father left this at my place before he died." Elin touched the handle. The wood was dark where her father's palms had polished it over years. Jonas nodded once. 7 feet before snow," he said. Then he walked away. The axe changed everything. The hatchet had made every cut an argument. The axe made cutting feel like answering a rhythm that had already been waiting in the wood. The wall climbed faster. That was when Caleb Voss first came. He was 19, a rail hand laid off after the tie crews moved west. He had carpenter's sense in his eyes, the kind that measures a roofline before the mouth makes conversation. He found the cabin at 5 feet and told her the roof would fail. Elin hated him for being right. "The walls may hold heat," he said, "but your roof will spend it." He came back the next day with a draw knife, a mallet, and 2 lengths of salvaged strap iron. He built a second roof skin over the first, packing dry grass and sawdust between the layers. He adjusted the smoke hole and showed her how to set the rafters so snow would slide instead of settle. He did not ask to be thanked. He came back the next day, and the day after that. Nils noticed before Elin allowed herself to. He looked up from a sentence about a fox and said, "Caleb keeps finding reasons." Elin told him to read the next line. Her face betrayed her anyway. In town, the land had another name. Not North Fork Crossing, not the Dead Rail Camp, not the Stovewood place. To Elias Crane, owner of the only general store within 20 miles, it was the Clay Tract. Crane had known Elin's father, more than known him. They had once planned to buy the land together when the railroad lease expired. Anders Rask had found the clay. Crane had found the money, or so the first agreement said. Elin learned the rest from a letter hidden inside the frame of an old supply shed. Her father had written it in the slanted hand she remembered from his work lists. Crane had gone to the railroad office behind his back, accused him of stealing company time to prospect clay, and had him dismissed without reference. With no other work available, Anders took a dangerous cutting job on a thawing slope. A tree came down wrong. Anders Rask died under it. 2 weeks after the funeral, Elias Crane made his first offer to buy North Fork Crossing. Elin folded the letter and placed it under the hearthstone with the first scrap of paper her father had hidden years earlier. She did not run to the sheriff. She was 15, poor, female, and currently famous as the girl building a pile of firewood into a house. Paper would not save her yet. Walls first, justice later. Crane came with the sheriff in November. By then the cabin had a roof, a crooked chimney, and walls just shy of 7 feet. Smoke moved out properly on calm days. The door was salvaged from a grain shed. The window was greased paper stretched over a frame and sealed with clay slip. Sheriff Bell did not enjoy the errand. His horse stood restless in the cold, while he explained that Elin occupied county land without title. Crane had filed to purchase the parcel. The board would meet before Christmas. If the sale was approved, she would have to leave. Crane sat his horse with the pleasant patience of a man who had never been forced to doubt the final result. "That structure is not worth dying in," he said. Elin looked at him. "My father died for this land before I built anything on it." For a moment, Crane's face emptied. Then it filled again with the expression he sold across his counter. "Your father died in an accident. That is what men call it when they are not the ones sent to the slope." Sheriff Bell shifted in the saddle. Nothing else was said. Nothing else needed to be. Crane had seen the wall. He had also seen that Elin knew more than he had counted on. The pressure began quietly. Caleb stopped coming. No note came from him. No explanation. Only absence. Nils delivered it in the careful voice of a child carrying adult cowardice, because adults had asked him to. Crane had said, in the store, in front of every man buying flour and nails, that anyone helping the Stovewood girl could buy his supplies elsewhere. There was nowhere else. Caleb owed money at the store. His mother needed coffee, lamp oil, salt, and medicine for a cough that had settled in badly. Elin understood all of that. Understanding did not make the clearing less empty. The minister preached about pride the following Sunday. He did not say Elin's name. He described a young woman who rejected guidance, lived beyond proper protection, and made an idol of stubborn independence. Everyone knew who the sermon belonged to. The gossip followed. A girl alone, a young man visiting, a cabin without a household head. Words built faster than walls and required less strength from the people stacking them. Marta Soren stopped coming in person, but every Tuesday, Nils brought something wrapped in cloth. Potatoes, dried apple, a heel of cheese, once a small jar of honey that must have cost his mother more than she could spare. Then one Tuesday, he brought a deed. Marta had outbid Elias Crane at the county board by $3 and paid in coin before Crane could arrange terms. The land had been filed in Marta's name with a signed trust transferring the parcel to Elin at 21. The note said only, "Do not die on my ground. Pay me back when you can." If a girl can build a wall out of what men discard, she can be trusted with dirt. Elin read it until the words blurred. For the first time since August, the ground beneath the cabin belonged to someone who wanted the cabin to stand. December hardened. The cabin's first true fire burned on the 3rd day of the month. Outside, the temperature sat at 9 degrees. Inside, by evening, it was 48. Elin placed her palm against the inner wall. The mortar felt not hot, not even warm exactly, but alive with stored heat. The wall had taken the fire's excess and kept it. Hours after the coals were banked, the wood ends and mortar breathed warmth back into the room slowly enough to matter. She slept without waking from cold. That morning felt like victory. January taught her victory is never a final condition. On the 9th, old Mrs. Havel came down the creek path wrapped in 3 shawls. She was nearly 70, half blind, and known for speaking to weather as if it were an animal she had raised badly. She looked at the clear sky, and then at the creek ice, and then at Flint, who would not stop pacing. "Big weather," she said. "When?" "Soon. Too warm, too still. Birds left yesterday all at once. Muskrats packed their lodges high. Wind is waiting." Elin trusted people least when they were certain, and most when they had spent years being corrected by land. Mrs. Havel had that kind of certainty. The next morning, Elin walked 12 miles to town and warned everyone she could. At the store, Crane laughed. At the church, the minister told her fear was not prophecy. At the schoolhouse, the new teacher looked at the soft sky, the melting snow, and the children playing without mittens, and said dismissal would remain at the usual hour. Elin stood in the road and understood the shape of the failure. No one believed the girl who built with trash when the sky looked merciful. So she went home and prepared the only thing that still listened to her. She carried in wood until the stack reached the window. She filled the kettle, the wash basin, and every jar she owned. She checked the door latch twice. She sealed the window corners with rags dipped in clay. She fed Flint half her stew because he had been watching the northwest corner of the clearing all afternoon, as though something there had teeth. The storm arrived the next day. It did not begin as snowfall. It began as a sound, a low, far roar like a train approaching over frozen ground, except the railroad was miles away, and the roar kept climbing. Elin was outside lifting the last armload of wood when the northwest horizon disappeared. A black-green wall swallowed the sky from earth to cloud, moving too fast for something so large. She had left her coat inside. She ran. The wind hit before she reached the door. It did not push, it struck. The wood fell from her arms. Snow became gravel against her face. The temperature seemed to drop between one breath and the next. She dropped to her knees and found the cabin by touch. Firewood stack, south wall, door frame, latch. She fell inside and slammed the door with her shoulder. Flint was already crouched by the stove, shaking so hard his collarbones showed beneath the skin. The coals were alive. Elin fed them kindling with fingers already turning white. She held her hands near the stove, but not against it, remembering her grandmother's warning about frozen skin. Bring the blood back slowly, or lose what the cold has borrowed. Outside, the storm became the only sound in the world. By evening, the thermometer nailed to the inner post read 51 degrees. Outside, it was already below zero. At midnight, the storm had taken 40 more degrees. The walls held. Not beautifully, not magically. They held like work holds, silently, stubbornly, without caring who had laughed at it. The first knock came near dawn. Elin opened the door against the wind and found Niels Soren half buried in drift snow, his little brother strapped to his back with a harness made from bedsheet strips. Marta was behind him, dragging herself forward with both hands because one of her boots had frozen solid around her ankle. Their house roof had opened on the north side. The stove would not draw after the chimney cracked. Marta had carried the smaller boy until she fell. Then Niels had taken him because children in hard country become older in the moments nobody asks them to. Elin pulled them in. Marta looked at the wall, then the thermometer, then Elin. She did not say she had been wrong. She was too busy breathing. More came after first light. Mrs. Havel, led by her son. The schoolteacher with 4 children tied together by scarf ends. The minister wrapped in an altar cloth after a church window burst inward. Mrs. Bell with her baby tucked inside her coat. Each time the door opened, the cabin lost heat. Each time it closed, the wall began giving it back. By noon, there were 14 people inside. The room smelled of wool, smoke, fear, and thawing skin. Children cried without much sound left in them. Adults stared at the walls because the walls were doing what many of them had said could not be done. Then Elias Crane came. He arrived carrying his daughter. She was 6 years old and blue around the mouth. Her name was Ruth. Elin knew her from the store, a small child with ribbons always tied too tightly and eyes that watched her father before answering anyone. Crane stood in the open doorway, so covered in snow that he looked carved from it. For once, there was no practiced expression on his face, no storekeeper's patience, no civic authority, no pleasant certainty, only a father holding a child who was running out of warmth. He could not make himself ask. Elin looked at Ruth, then she stepped back. "Bring her to the south wall." Crane crossed the threshold. The door shut behind him. There were now 16 people inside a cabin the county had called idle, built from rail waste and creek clay by the girl the town had laughed into a sermon. The temperature outside fell to 40 below. Inside it stayed at 49. Elin sat with Ruth against the warmest wall, the one that had taken the fire all night and stored it deep. She warmed the child's hands between her palms slowly, patiently, letting the color return the way dawn returns when it is not hurried. Crane watched from across the room. His eyes found the shelf above the hearth. He saw the 2 folded letters. He knew her father's hand before Elin had to say a word. That night, the minister got on his knees and prayed in a voice smaller than the fire. Not for the storm to end, for forgiveness. "I used God's name for my own certainty," he said, "and a child built the house we are sheltering in." No one corrected him. Near midnight, the door opened again. Caleb Voss fell through it and collapsed face first onto the dirt floor. He had not needed shelter. His room at the rail boarding house had a stove and a roof that held. He had come because after 2 hours of listening to the wind, he could not live with the fact that he had left Elin alone because a store account had frightened him. His hands were damaged. His left cheek was wax white with frostbite. But he was alive. Elin did not forgive him in that moment. Forgiveness was too large, and the room was too crowded, and the storm still wanted everyone inside it. She only took his hands and began the same slow work. That was enough for one night. The storm lasted into the next day. The walls sweated, smoked slightly near the stove, and held. The mortar did not split. The roof did not cave. The chimney coughed twice and kept drawing. At one point, Nils woke from a feverish sleep and whispered, "The stovewood house is winning." No one laughed, because by then, every person in the room understood the contest. When the wind finally dropped, silence did not arrive all at once. It came in layers. First, the roar became a growl, Then the growl became a hiss along the eaves. Then even that stopped, and the cabin was filled with the enormous sound of people realizing they had survived. The door opened on a white world with no roads left in it. Search parties found other houses split open, wagons overturned, bodies along fence lines, children who had left school into a sky that lied to them. North Fork Crossing became a marker on every search route. If they are alive, men said, take them to the stovewood cabin. For 3 days, Elin's fire did not go out. On the 4th day, Sheriff Bell came with a torn eviction notice in his pocket. He did not read it. He fed both halves into the stove and watched them curl. The board has declined Mr. Crane's petition, he said. Elin looked at the burning paper. That was Marta Soren's land already. The sheriff nodded. It seems everyone understands that now. Crane came alone a week later. He walked the road instead of riding, which made the apology arrive on tired legs. Flint watched him from the threshold. Crane held out a signed withdrawal of every claim he had made against the parcel. Elin read it and folded it once. My father, she said. Crane looked at the cabin wall. He looked at the hearth. He looked anywhere except her face until there was nowhere useful left to look. I did not swing the axe that killed him. No. I took the work from him. Yes. I told myself that was business. The clearing was still. Ordinary cold had returned, the kind people know how to name. Crane's voice thinned. It was not business. Elin waited. It was theft, he said, and it led him to that hill. That was all the law would ever give her. Not a trial, not a sentence, not the clean shape justice takes in stories told by people who have never needed it. But it was the truth spoken in open air by the man who had spent 2 years refusing it. She kept the withdrawal. She kept the letters. She did not shake his hand. By spring, people came to learn the wall. Marta built the first edition, 12 feet by 12, stovewood and clay, with Nils stacking the smallest pieces and declaring himself foreman of mortar. Jonas added a wall to a smokehouse and admitted in a voice that sounded painful that 18 inches was not as foolish as it looked. Caleb worked where Elin allowed him to work, which was mostly outside at first. Slowly, the space between them changed from a wound into a scar. Not invisible, not gone, stronger than open skin. Families came from 20 miles away with wagons full of crooked cutoffs and questions. Elin taught them the ratios. 4 parts clay, 1 part sand, straw chopped fine, ash if the clay was greasy, lime if you could afford it. Keep the roof honest. Raise the foundation above meltwater. Never leave a straight path for wind. By the next winter, 9 stovewood rooms stood across the valley. By the winter after that, there were more. Some were ugly, most were. Beauty had not been the first requirement, but they were warm. And in that country, warm was not comfort. Warm was permission to live until morning. Years later, people tried to make the story simpler. They said Elin Rask survived because she was stubborn. They said she survived because a cabin made from firewood somehow beat the blizzard. They said the storm proved her right. But the truth was harder and better. She survived because she remembered what other people dismissed. She listened to clay, to animal tracks, to old women's weather, to immigrant building habits, to a father's unfinished warning, to the small intelligence inside rejected things. The storm did not make the wall true. It only removed everyone else's excuses for not seeing it. One afternoon, long after the snow melt, Elin stood at the creek bank where the clay still showed blue beneath the grass. Young cottonwoods had begun to rise between the stumps. Flint slept in the doorway. The stovewood wall stood behind her, rough, scarred, and whole. Men had called that wood waste. The county had called that ground idle. The town had called that girl foolish. Then the cold came looking for gaps and found none.